So we mentioned facts, fact measurements, and fact tables several times so far. It is time to define those a little bit more precisely. A fact table stores the performance measures, aka facts, of a particular business process. Enrollment count, which is always 1, and it's an example of so-called factless table, which we'll talk about later on, and student grades were examples used in our running case of the student enrollment data mart, and shown, one of which is shown here in the top right corner. Other examples include sales, right here in the bottom right corner, both dollar amounts, the cost in dollar terms, as well as the sales quantities, and then others such as account balances, inventory quantity on hand, etc., etc. So a fact table is typically the largest in the data warehouse, and it's often relatively narrow, but extremely long, with millions to billions of rows. Each row corresponds to a measurement event at the intersection of the appropriate dimensions. An example for our running case of student enrollments is an event corresponding to a student enrolling in a particular course during a particular term for a particular date time section with a particular instructor in a particular room. At the end of the term, the enrollment grade fact is also recorded at this grain level. Another example is a sale made for a particular product at a particular time to a particular customer in a particular store with a particular cashier and under a specific promotion. So the sales dollar and quantity as well as cost amount would be recorded at that grain level. On the previous slide, we mentioned grain levels a few times. So what is the grain level of a fact table? Fact table grain is the level of detail associated with a fact table measurements. For student enrollment fact table, the intersection of term, student, and class is the grain level because it cannot be subdivided further. Term is the shortest period of time for which a student can register for a class. A particular section of a given class still represents the same class. Okay, so this daytime key is not part of the grain. Similarly, so instructors can be changed, right? So instructor or faculty can be changed as well as rooms, okay? Not affecting the grain of the enrollment table. So that's why the grain is defined with the term, student, and course, but the dimensions can also include the faculty, the particular section, and where the class will be held. Similarly, one row scan of an individual product at a given time for a particular customer at a point of sale terminal is the grain for the retail sales table. So which product, exactly when, and who bought it. Okay, the presence or absence of a store clerk or a promotion or even the store this transaction is taking place at will not alter the level of such a retail transaction, so that the first 3 keys compose the grain, but there may be other dimensions such as promotion and store. Most of the fact table measurements are numeric and additive in nature. Sales dollars and quantities, costs, and student enrollments as well as grades are not the grades are examples of fully additive measures. Lots of other measures such as account balances in a kind of banking example or student grades are semi-additive, right? So we can't just add the grades across multiple students and multiple sections. That just doesn't make sense. But it does make sense to average them across certain dimensions, but they cannot simply be added across time. Finally, measures such as unit prices, or on the other hand, are non-additive and are typically used to come up with dimensional attributes such as low, medium, and high-priced item categories along which transactions can be summarized. For a more in-depth study of the retail sales and other related retail dimensional models, see Kimball's Chapter 3. The majority of fact tables are used to store transactions such as retail sales, student enrollments, or inventory replenishment orders. The grain is determined at random and discrete points in time, such as an item scanned at a cash register, student enrollment in a class, or triggering of an inventory reorder. In addition to transactional fact tables, periodic snapshots are arguably the next most widely used type. In an inventory management data mart, each day a row is added for every combination of product and store to record the current level of inventory. The grain here is determined at predictable intervals in time, so-called snapshot periods or snapshot dates, like a day, and describe performance over that time period rather than an instantaneous transaction, such as the retail example used thus far. For a more in-depth study of inventory snapshot and other inventory-related dimensional models, see Kimball's Chapter 4. The third and last type of fact table is the accumulating snapshot, which combines multiple snapshots into a single and relatively wide fact table. Although not as used as the first two types, this type of fact table is appropriate for cases where we want to track a pipeline of events such as a student admission process, patient visits, and or inventory fulfillment process. This type of a fact table has multiple date keys marking each of the pipeline milestone events, and the multiple dates are often handled as aliases of a single date dimensional table. See Dimensional Role-Playing in Chapter 6, page 170. Unlike the transaction and periodic snapshot tables, the rows of accumulated snapshots are updated multiple times. That is to say, each time a milestone event has been reached. Again, please see Kimball Chapter 4 and the following slide for more detail. There it is. The accumulating inventory snapshot model is visually presented on this slide. The product, warehouse, and vendor keys are repeatedly inserted into the into the table rows as a particular product is first received from a particular vendor in a receiving area of a particular warehouse. Quantity received right here is likely the only measurement recorded at this initial beginning pipeline event. This is followed by the inspection date right here, quantity inspected, quantity rejected and then returned to vendor, and the difference between the date inspected and date received, also known as receipt to inspected lag. Then comes the date when the accepted quantity is actually placed into a particular bin and sort of officially added to the inventory. Receipt to a bin placement lag is also recorded, as are, of course, the product, warehouse, and vendor keys. Then comes the date of the initial shipment to the customer with quantity shipped to customer, quantity then returned by customer, out of which certain quantities returned to inventory, and the rest is, I guess, marked as quantity that has been damaged. Apparently not all the intermediate dates here are recorded. This would create basically too many columns, although that is certainly the possibility. But then the last shipment date and the initial to last shipment lag at the bottom, they mark the end of the pipeline. This is the way I'm anyway reading this table. This last slide in a series of fact tables summarizes the three different types. Transaction fact tables do not have any predictable periodicity, which depends on a set of random transaction events. Periodic snapshot fact tables, by contrast, have, by definition, predictable periods between the snapshot events. Accumulating snapshot tables depend on the time span of the pipeline or workflow, the beginning and end of which are uncertain, as well as the milestone events in between. The grain of the transaction table is one row per individual transaction, which is comprised of a set of dimensions as well as measurements. For periodic snapshots, we get one row per snapshot date with all the required dimensions. Same for the pipeline occurrences in the accumulated snapshot fact tables. The transaction dates for retail sales are very dense, assuming lots of transactions at any given time during the day. Depending on the snapshot frequencies, we get a single snapshot per day, multiple snapshots throughout the day, or just few per week. as it could be the case. For accumulating snapshots, we have multiple dates representing pipeline event occurrences, which could be dense or sparse depending on the workflow milestone event dates. The measurement fact happen instantaneously or record, at that point in time for transactional tables. Can be cumulative for periodic snapshots like average inventory between two snapshot dates, and are dependent on the type of pipeline event for accumulating snapshots. Finally, both transactional and periodic snapshot tables are updated once only, whereas accumulating snapshots are updated multiple times whenever a particular pipeline event occurs. This is not a good place to pause.